On a cold November evening in 1987, 6 children walked into a small rehearsal room in the basement of St. Hildegard's Catholic School in rural Vermont. They were scheduled to practice for the upcoming Advent Mass. A simple task, 1 hour, then dinner. Their music teacher, Miss Elaine May, gave them warm tea, tuned the piano, and left them with sheet music for O Come, Emmanuel. She told the nun on duty she'd be back in 40 minutes. The basement door was closed behind her. That was the last time anyone saw them. At 5:48 p.m., the bell rang for dinner. The children didn't come up. By 6 o'clock, Miss May returned to find the rehearsal room completely empty. No signs of struggle. No scattered music. The teacups were still half full. One chair was gently rocking. She assumed they had gone upstairs. But the hallway was quiet. Security footage from the school's only hallway camera facing the stairs showed nothing. Not one child passing through, not even a shadow. The frame was frozen in time. The children had entered that room and simply never came out. St. Hildegard's was the kind of school no one expected to make the news. Built in 1883, nestled in the wooded hills of Caledonia County, it was part orphanage, part boarding school. A fading stone building with creaking floors, antique pews, and windows that didn't quite shut in winter. Run by an aging Catholic order, it housed 42 children and 8 staff members in 1987. The 6 who disappeared were members of the school's junior choir. They ranged in age from 7 to 10. All lived on the upper floor in shared dormitories. Most were wards of the state. A few had distant relatives. None had parents who visited often. The missing were Thomas Keene, 9, curious, outspoken, often drew maps of places that didn't exist. Isaiah Bloom, 10, quiet, gifted singer, scared of storms. Jude Parson, 8, had asthma, carried his inhaler in a red pouch. Elsa Monroe, 9, sharp-eyed, usually leading the others, known to question rules. Ruby and Rose Weller, 7, identical twins, inseparable, spoke mostly to each other. At first, no one panicked. The staff believed the children had played a prank, slipped out a back way, hidden in the attic or the chapel. But St. Hildegard's had no back way, and the rehearsal room had one door, one window, both locked from the inside. By 7 p.m., the sheriff's department had been called. By 9:30, flashlights swept every hallway, every stairwell, every locked cupboard. A team of volunteers from the nearby parish joined the search. Some called names, others sang hymns. At 11:42 p.m., a fireman unlocked the door to the old boiler room directly beneath the rehearsal space. It hadn't been used since 1974. Dust coated every surface, but there were 6 small footprints in the dust. They stopped in the center of the room, and then nothing. No exit, no trail, no explanation, just silence. The official missing persons report was filed at 12:06 a.m. on the 18th of November, 1987. It listed 6 children, the location. St. Hildegard's Boarding School for Orphaned Youth. The last known sighting, basement music room, 4:58 p.m. The next morning, search teams arrived from across the county. Vermont State Police, local volunteers, forest rangers, even the National Guard. A 4-day ground search was launched covering nearly 12 square kilometers around the school. Tracking dogs picked up the scent at the stairwell to the basement and lost it 3 feet from the rehearsal door. One dog whimpered, then sat down facing the wall. It refused to move. Investigators brought in ground-penetrating radar. They scanned under the floorboards, behind the walls. They checked ventilation ducts, drains, false panels. Nothing. Just old brick, wood, and dust. The school was shut down. All other students were relocated. Parents and guardians, those who were reachable, were brought in and questioned. The children's rooms were untouched, beds still made, toys still arranged. One twin bed had a music sheet tucked under the pillow. The title, Agnes DEI. Sister Marianne, the nun on dormitory duty that evening, was questioned for 11 hours. She described walking the children to the rehearsal room, confirming their attendance, and locking the door behind them as instructed. They were laughing, she said. Thomas was humming. Jude dropped his inhaler. Ruby waved at me through the little glass window. Then I walked away. She never saw them again. Miss May, the choir teacher, blamed herself. She said she left the room to fetch new sheet music from the main office. She was gone no more than 15 minutes. When she came back, everything was exactly as she had left it, except empty. By the end of the week, rumors had already begun. Some claimed the children had found a hidden exit. Others believed they'd been abducted and smuggled out through a service tunnel from the school's original 19th century foundation. But every tunnel, crawl space, and pipe was accounted for. Every meter of ground beneath the school was checked. Nothing. No signs of entry or escape. The final security report issued by state investigators was chilling in its lack of resolution. No physical evidence of departure. No signs of foul play. No explanation at this time. Recommend suspension pending new information. In the absence of facts, stories grew like vines. A janitor quit. A nun moved to Canada. Miss May disappeared from public view. The door to the basement was sealed with 3 wooden boards and a heavy cross. No one was allowed inside. And from that day forward, the old music room was known by a different name, the choir room that swallowed 6 children. The day the children vanished began, by all accounts, as normal. It was a Wednesday. Cloudy skies, damp air, morning mass at 7:30, oatmeal in the cafeteria, chores, Latin class, midday hymn rehearsal in the main chapel, all standard, all ordinary. Miss Elaine May, the 26-year-old music instructor, had planned a private choir session that evening in the basement music room. She had chosen the 6 most disciplined children, her favorites, by some accounts though, begin rehearsing the more delicate parts of the Advent Mass. The room itself was rarely used. It had once been a storage space, but had been cleaned and converted into a practice hall. Small, low ceiling, upright piano in the corner, a narrow bench, one long, flickering overhead bulb, no windows, except for a tiny square pane set in the door. She had asked Sister Marianne to escort the children down at 4:45 p.m. The nun agreed, as she always did. She brought a basket of tea and warm rolls for them. A gesture of comfort in the cold November air. The last confirmed sighting was by a younger student, Beatrice Lowe, age 9, who saw the 6 children descending the steps just before 5. She waved at Elsa Monroe, who smiled and held up a folded sheet of music like a secret. Beatrice later told police, "I heard singing. Not loud, just a few voices. It was nice. They were laughing." By 5:30, the hallways began to fill with the sound of dinner bells and shuffling feet. But the basement remained silent. Miss May returned at 5:42 p.m. She opened the door, found an empty room. Steam still rose from the teacups. The piano bench was warm. She waited 2 minutes, then walked to the stairwell, expecting to find them hiding, perhaps trying to scare her. She checked the bathrooms, the chapel, the coat closet, nothing. Then she ran. When staff began searching the school, the mood quickly shifted from irritation to unease. The children hadn't just slipped away, they had vanished without trace, without time, without logic. One staff member described the basement air as heavy. Another said they felt dizzy. An older nun refused to enter at all. She crossed herself 3 times, whispering, "Some rooms are meant to stay shut." At 6:30 p.m., the headmaster ordered a full lockdown. By 7 o'clock, police were on site. By 8 o'clock, dogs were brought in. By 9:30, journalists were calling. At midnight, the door was locked. By dawn, it was sealed. And from that day forward, the basement rehearsal room was no longer used, spoken of, or even acknowledged. The children's names were carved into the chapel wall 3 days later. Underneath, the inscription read, They sang and were taken. The first 72 hours after the disappearance were a blur of boots, flashlights, and silent prayers. Nothing made sense, and the people who were supposed to bring answers, investigators, deputies, church officials, brought only more questions. By the morning of the 19th of November, the school had become a staging ground. Yellow tape surrounded the perimeter. Officers in heavy coats paced the icy courtyard. Reporters hovered near the old wooden sign that read, St. Hildegard's Catholic Boarding School, founded 1883. Everyone agreed on one thing. There was nowhere for the children to go. The building had no underground tunnels. Blueprints confirmed that. The heating ducts were too small for even a toddler to crawl through. The only window in the music room was no bigger than a shoebox and sealed shut from years of paint and dust. The rehearsal room itself, once familiar, now dreaded, was examined inch by inch. Photos were taken, measurements recorded. The door was standard, lock intact, no signs of forced entry or tampering. But there was something that kept coming up in the investigators' notes. The acoustics. Officers inside the room reported an unusual echo, one that seemed inconsistent with the room's size. A whisper in the corner could sometimes be heard directly across the hall. A step near the piano echoed too long, too sharp. A structural engineer was brought in. He found no defects, no hidden crawl spaces, no secondary chambers. But he did note one anomaly. The foundation wall shared with the adjacent boiler room is 22 inches thicker than elsewhere, possibly due to an older renovation or sealed space. The theory didn't lead anywhere. That same afternoon, they reopened the old boiler room beneath the rehearsal space. It had been disused for years, cold and filled with rusted equipment. Most of the floor was undisturbed, except for the dust in the center, where those 6 faint footprints had appeared. Investigators photographed them, measured them, but found no direction. The prints simply ended, like a trail that had chosen to vanish. Nothing had been dragged. Nothing had been moved. No child could have exited without leaving more behind. That night, 2 searchers who had spent time alone in the boiler room independently reported the same thing. A sound, like humming, like a soft voice singing behind a wall. When they checked their watches, both times read 5:58 p.m. Exactly 24 hours since the children had entered the room above. They weren't believed. The next day, one of the deputies refused to return to the basement. He turned in his badge later that week. By the end of November 1987, the official search had yielded nothing. No footprints, no fibers, no fingerprints. The dogs were confused. The maps led nowhere. Every possibility had been tested except the ones no one wanted to believe. The story had already hit the national news. 6 children vanish inside Catholic school, no exit found. Aerial footage of the school played on every channel. People wrote letters. Some offered prayers. Some blamed the church. Some just said what everyone else was afraid to say. They were taken by something. In press conferences, Sheriff Daniel Whitmore was calm, authoritative, and careful. We are still actively investigating this case. We are considering all possibilities. The children may be alive. We have no reason to assume otherwise. But internally, investigators were cracking. The FBI sent 2 agents who arrived in dark suits and left 3 days later without speaking to the press. Their notes, obtained years later through a Freedom of Information request, included phrases like unusual atmospheric distortion in lower level, inconsistent thermal signatures, room B3. Staff hesitant to discuss architectural modifications made post 1954. No conclusions, just static. The school itself was shut down indefinitely. The remaining students were transferred out. Teachers were let go. The building stood quiet, except for the choir room, which remained sealed. 3 wooden beams across the door, a padlock, a red ribbon, a printed sign, "Do not enter," property of Caledonia County Sheriff's Office. Some said the ribbon was added by the head nun, Mother Agnes, who was never seen in public again. Others claimed the ribbon was always there. Miss Maythie music teacher left Vermont 2 weeks after the disappearance. No formal statement, just a single message written to a colleague. "It's not a room, it's a mouth," and I opened it. She never taught again. Meanwhile, families of the missing children clung to hope. Some organized independent searches of the surrounding forest. Some consulted psychics. Some sued the diocese. And some simply sat in silence, staring at doorways their children used to walk through. By Christmas, the case was cold. No leads, no answers, no children, and yet inside the sealed basement, in a room no one entered, a cup of tea remained half full. The steam was gone, but the scent lingered. The first knock came at 10:17 a.m. It was Pascal, the baker's son, who lived 2 doors down. He had heard the shouting and came barefoot across the yard. "What's going on?" Louis didn't stop running, didn't answer, just yelled back, "He's gone. Maurice is gone." Within 20 minutes, 6 people were searching, then 12, then 20. Farmers dropped their tools. Teenagers on bicycles looped around the orchards. An old man with a cane walked the canal path. By 11 a.m., the dirt road in front of the Damien house was lined with cars. Doors slammed, boots hit gravel, hands reached for flashlights and sticks and radios. The field, once golden and serene, now looked like a war zone. Men in wide hats combed the tall grass. Women screamed his name into the wind. Jean sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, silent. He stared at the fence, the one he and his brother had never crossed. Someone brought tracking dogs. 2 shaggy hounds with long noses sniffed a shirt from the laundry line and took off down the trail. But 50 meters in, they stopped, sniffed again, whined. Nothing. No scent, no direction, no lead. People searched under bridges, behind stone walls, inside broken sheds. One woman insisted on checking the church bell tower. Another waded chest deep into a pond near the wheat field. No one asked why. Everyone just moved. Because a 4-year-old child had disappeared in broad daylight from his own backyard. And in a village where nothing ever happened, this was impossible. By noon, the search had a name: Operation Damien. 2 police cruisers from the nearby commune of Revel arrived first, followed by a white van with blue-striped gendarmes, the National Rural Police. Then came the Pompier's local fireman boots, stomping into the dust with stretchers and ropes and gear they wouldn't need. The mayor stood with Louis near the fence, both men silent. Marianne was inside, sedated under the watch of the town nurse. Jean hadn't moved from the blanket on the porch. At 13:45, the first helicopter appeared over the ridge, a dull insect in the hot sky. It circled once, then again, blades slicing the summer stillness, as searchers looked from the air for any sign movement, color, broken brush, a boy. There was none. Officers in gray uniforms established a perimeter. Maps were unrolled across the hood of a car, markers, grid lines, coordinates. The command post was set up in the back of a refrigerated produce truck. Search radius, 20 kilometers. They divided the terrain into sectors. Sector A, open farmland. Sector B, riverbank and canal path. Sector C, dense pine forest. Sector D, the old quarry, fenced and off limits. Dogs were deployed again, this time with trained handlers. But just like before, they sniffed, wandered, whined, and stopped. Gendarmes asked questions. Had anyone seen a vehicle? A stranger? A traveler? Nothing. "No," said Pascal. "It's just us." By 17 o'clock, 75 people were in the field. By Sunset, over 100. The only thing they found was a small blue toy cow dropped in the grass. The one Maurice always carried, but it was only a few meters from the fence. Too close. Too obvious. too clean. The search continued into the night. Floodlights lit the trees. Radios crackled. Dogs barked at shadows. But by dawn, there was still nothing. No movement, no sound, no trace. And so the questions began to change. By the third day, the reporters had arrived. 2 vans from France, 3 parked at the edge of the field. 1 cameraman filmed the empty swing in the Damien yard. Another stood on the road and whispered into a microphone. No leads, no witnesses. A boy gone in seconds, and now doubts. The tone shifted. How could a child vanish so fast? Why were there no signs of struggle? Why did the dogs lose the trail so early? People wanted answers. And when the forest offered none, they looked to the house. At first, it was quiet, polite. Are you sure he wasn't angry that morning? Had he ever run off before? Was he a curious child? Then came the harder questions. Did Louis ever hit the children? Was Marianne mentally stable? Did they argue that morning? Neighbors recalled small things. A fight about school last month. Marianne's unusual devotion to discipline. A rumor that Maurice wasn't allowed sweets. That the boys were never left alone with anyone. Reporters ate it up. One tabloid published an article titled, "The Boy, the Fence, and the Family That Knew Too Much." Louis refused interviews. Marianne didn't leave the house. Jean stopped speaking entirely. Then came the warrant. Police searched the home, the barn, the cellar. They tested the soil in the back garden, took the bed sheets, photographed the kitchen, asked about a missing hammer. They found nothing. Just a family shattered into pieces, too tired to fight the story building around them. By the end of the first week, the village no longer spoke with one voice. Some believed the Damiens were victims, others suspects. The little bakery stopped offering bread on credit. The postman no longer waved from his bicycle. Whispers began in pews during Sunday Mass, then spilled into the aisles, then into the cafes. Maybe the boy never disappeared. Maybe there was an accident. Maybe he was never even out there. An elderly woman claimed she saw Louis burning something in the garden the night before the disappearance. No one could confirm it. The next day, she denied ever saying it, but the damage was done. The Damiens, once seen as quiet and simple, were now strangers. Untouchable, untalked to, uninvited. Even Father Henri, the village priest, became cautious. During his homily, he spoke of darkness that can live inside houses. He never said a name. He didn't have to. A young man in the village, Antoine, who had dated Marianne's cousin, told a reporter that Marianne had once slapped Jean at the market, hard enough for the sound to echo off the stone walls. The reporter nodded, scribbled, and left out the part where the boy had just knocked over a basket of eggs. Rumors grew like vines that the family belonged to a secret religious sect, that Louis had a temper, that Jean had once told a classmate Maurice would disappear someday. None of it was confirmed. All of it was repeated. Meanwhile, the forest grew quiet again. The helicopters stopped. The press moved on. And the fence behind the Damien house stood taller than ever, not because it had changed, but because everyone now stood on the other side of it. Summer turned to autumn, and still they searched. Each morning began with lists, names of sectors, volunteers, fuel checks, weather reports. The Gendarmerie Nationale sent a rotation of officers every 2 weeks. The regional prefecture approved drone flights, additional dogs, and forensic teams. Still nothing. The terrain was treacherous in places. Gullies, ravines, old mines. Maps were redrawn daily. Entire hillsides were combed by lines of silent searchers moving shoulder to shoulder, their eyes low, their voices quiet. One day, they drained a pond in Sector D, near the abandoned stone mill. They found rusted tools, a child's bicycle from the 80s, and a dead pig. Not Maurice. Another team brought in cadaver dogs from Bordeaux. The dogs barked excitedly near a cluster of trees, but then circled and sat. Nothing more. Just moss, damp earth, and birdsong. Locals grew tired. Farmers had harvest to collect. Volunteers faded. Searchers began to ask if they were still needed. But Louis returned every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with Jean, sometimes with strangers who didn't even speak French foreign volunteers who had read about the case in tabloids and come to help, hoping for a miracle. He'd carry binoculars, a flashlight, and a notebook. He'd walk the same trail again and again, speaking his son's name like it was part of a prayer. "Morris, if you hear me, please move something." Marianne stopped leaving the house. She nailed a crucifix to the fence post, lit a candle at sundown, refused to speak to press, spoke only to God. At night, she whispered lullabies into the empty hallway, still setting a cup of warm milk by the window. Jean started drawing trees. Only trees, hundreds of them, all with a small door in the center. By winter, the house had changed. The lights were dimmer. The curtains never moved. The warmth that once lived in the Damien home had bled out, one day at a time, leaving only shapes and shadows. Marianne no longer smiled. She rarely spoke. She began lighting candles at random hours and would sit for hours in the corner of the kitchen, eyes locked on nothing, hands folded like she was holding something invisible. She refused to throw away any of Maurice's clothes. His bed remained made. His toys stayed in their places. She kept the milk fresh in the refrigerator for him. Every morning, she wrote a new Bible verse on a scrap of paper and tucked it into the branches of a fig tree by the fence. One afternoon, she told a visitor that the Lord took Morris to teach us obedience. Then she closed the door and didn't open it again. Louis, who had once been the one holding everything together, was beginning to crack. He was no longer the father who shouted across the field. He was quieter now, thinner, less real. He spent most of his time walking aimlessly between the fence and the field, often stopping and standing still for long stretches, as if waiting for a voice that never came. He stopped working. The chickens went unsold. The barn roof sagged. One night, he sat on the floor of Maurice's room and whispered, "I just need something. A sock, a piece of hair, a whisper, anything." John was withdrawn. At school, he said little. He started drawing spirals, then trees, then fences. In one picture, he drew himself on one side of the fence and his brother on the other smaller, fading into the background. A teacher once asked what was behind the trees. "The part where God forgets you," he answered. "The 25th of July, 1992. The sun rose the same way it had the year before. The same field, the same fence. But the house was different now. Quieter, heavier. Morris would have turned 5. There was no cake, no party, no guests. Just a plastic toy cow placed gently at the base of the fig tree beneath a folded paper with a verse from Psalms, "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow." Marianne rose early that morning, dressed slowly, brushed her hair in silence. She carried a small wrapped box in both hands and walked to the edge of the fence, where the grass began to rise toward the forest path. She placed the box on the dirt, stepped back, Saturday on the ground. She stayed there until the sun crossed the yard and the shadows touched her feet. Then she stood, turned, and went inside, without a word. Louis didn't come out that day. He hadn't spoken much in weeks. His beard had grown long, his eyes glassy, his posture slumped like the roof of the barn. The gendarmerie arrived around noon. A man in uniform stepped out, looked uncomfortable, and handed Louis a folded letter. It bore the seal of the regional prefecture. The words were clear, clinical. "As of this date, the active search and investigation regarding the disappearance of Maurice Damien is hereby suspended pending new evidence or witness testimony. The case remains officially open, but all search operations will cease." They said they had done everything they could, that all leads had been followed, that there were no signs of foul play, that children sometimes vanish in the wilderness. Louis read it, folded it, placed it in a drawer, and never spoke of it again. The field remained. The fence still stood. But something beneath the soil had changed. Maurice was now officially gone. And yet, somehow, he had never been further away. 1,997. 5 years had passed. The Damien house no longer drew attention. The story had faded from the newspapers, replaced by newer tragedies and cleaner narratives. In the village, people stopped whispering. The silence had settled in. Until the letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address. Postmarked Lionover, 400 kilometers away. Inside, a single handwritten page, careful script, blue ink, just one sentence. I saw a boy in the monastery at Charbonnières who looks exactly like the child from the poster. No name, no signature, no proof. Louis read it 3 times, showed it to no one. Then, a week later, a second letter arrived. He doesn't speak, but he stares at everyone. He's always dressed the same. The brothers don't let him outside alone. This time, Louis took it to the local gendarmerie, who contacted authorities in Lyon. Investigators visited the monastery, questioned the priests, looked through records. Nothing. The boy they were shown was younger than Maurice would have been, and the monks denied ever housing a mute child. The claim is unfounded, the report said. The monastery is private, but no such child has been identified. A month passed. Then a third letter came. This one contained a blurry photograph shot from far away through a wrought iron gate. A boy, small frame, pale shirt, barefoot, looking directly at the camera. The face was unclear, but the eyes, they made Marianne drop the page. The photo was sent for enhancement. Analysts said it was inconclusive. No way to confirm identity. No clear features. No forensic value. Louis asked for the original to be returned. It never was. The letter stopped. But something had been reopened. Not the case. Not officially. Just the wound. His name was Lieutenant Adrien Malraux, 34 years old. Sharp jaw, ex-paratrooper. Moved like he didn't trust chairs. In 1998, he was transferred to the Haute-Garonne region, where old files gathered dust in metal cabinets. He was told to review cold cases for reclassification, which really meant close them quietly, stack the folders, archive the pain. But when he found the Damien file, he stopped. It was thin for such a massive disappearance. Scattered notes, 2 dog-eared photographs, a hand-drawn map, a transcript of Jean's witness statement, just 11 sentences long. And then the letters from Lyon. Too clean, Malraux told a colleague. Too symmetrical, like someone scrubbed it. He drove to the village, the house, found Louis sitting outside, whittling a block of wood into nothing. They spoke for 15 minutes. Louis barely looked up, said nothing new, nothing strange. Just one sentence Malraux didn't forget. If you want to find him, don't follow the trail. Follow what's not there. Malraux started digging. He reviewed sect activity in the 1990s, particularly around the Toulouse-Lyon corridor. He discovered several reports quietly buried about closed Christian cells, often described as spiritual communities, but suspected in child isolation cases. Some were tied to illegal adoptions, others to ritual cleansing. He found witness testimony from a social worker who claimed in 1993 she'd seen a mute boy with a plastic cow being led into a van outside Montauban. That report had been dismissed. No follow-up, no composite sketch, no internal memo. Malraux ordered a forensic review of the Lyon photo, now missing. The chain of custody had been lost. No one knew who processed it. There were no records. He contacted the monastery. They refused to speak with him. And just like that, the silence returned. Malraux didn't close the case. But after 3 months, he was reassigned. No one replaced him. It was the 3rd of October, 1999, 8 years after Maurice disappeared. The air had already turned cold in the hills. 3 local hunters were tracking wild boar along the old Massat Ridge, just west of the Damien village. The forest there was steep, layered in moss, and quiet in a way that made men whisper without realizing. They weren't looking for anything but tracks. Instead, they found something else. In a shallow impression beneath a twisted birch tree, half covered by dry leaves, lay a small child's shoe. It wasn't torn. It wasn't weathered. It was almost clean. A dark blue sneaker with a white sole and cartoon sheep stitched along the side. Size 24. The fabric still firm. The laces still intact. One of the hunters recognized it. It looked brand new, he later told reporters. Except it wasn't. They didn't touch it. They called the gendarmerie, who arrived by 17 o'clock. Photos were taken. The surrounding area was cordoned off. Forensics swept a 15-meter radius around the shoe. They found no bones, no clothing, no fibers, no footprints, nothing. And yet Teveriwan knew it was Maurice's shoe. Marianne confirmed it, tearfully, instantly. She had bought them for him exactly 3 weeks before he vanished. Only one shoe had ever been missing. The other had remained in his closet all these years, still tied, still waiting. DNA testing was ordered, but the result was maddening. No usable DNA profile. No blood, no skin, no human trace at all. The shoe had simply appeared in a part of the forest that had been searched dozens of times before, in a place where nothing grows too fast, in a spot that had never once been flagged. Some officers whispered what no one wanted to say aloud. That shoe wasn't lost. It was placed. The shoe was sent to the Institut de Recherche Criminelle in Paris. There, in a sterile lab under fluorescent light, it was examined with the same precision used for homicides and terrorism cases. Technicians ran multiple DNA tests, swabbed the insole, scraped beneath the tongue, scanned for skin cells, hair, sweat, blood. They found nothing. Not degraded DNA. Not partial strands. Just nothing. No trace of Maurice. No trace of anyone. It was as if the shoe had never been worn. But it had. The scuff on the right toe matched a photo taken in 1991, a picture of Maurice on the porch, grinning, one shoelace untied, that same toe nudging a red toy truck. The match was indisputable. Yet the material told a different story. The shoe's condition after 8 years in an open forest was impossible. No mildew, no insect damage, no rot. It looked like it had been placed days ago. Investigators disagreed. Some believed it had been buried and recently exposed by rain. Others insisted it had never been there at all during initial searches. But there was no animal sign, no digging, no disturbed soil, no seasonal explanation, and still no body. Without DNA or surrounding evidence, the case could not be reopened. Not officially. The finding was recorded, stored, and eventually forgotten. Only the Damiens remembered. Marianne placed the shoe in a wooden box and set it on Maurice's bed. Each morning, she would lift the lid, touch it gently, and close it again. She once told a journalist, "They say there's no trace of him on the shoe, but that's the only place I still feel him." When the report was filed, the official line was clinical. A child's shoe, consistent with previous descriptions, was recovered on Massat Ridge. No biological evidence recovered. No indication of recent burial or mechanical placement. Investigation remains inconclusive. But off the record, things were different. Some officers believed the shoe had been planted. A way to give false hope. A message or diversion. One gendarme quietly told his superior, "If this was a kidnapping, that's not a clue. That's a taunt." A local theory gained traction. That the person responsible had kept the shoe and returned to the area years later, leaving it behind on purpose. Why? No one could say. Another group leaned into the stranger explanations. Occult forums began discussing the case again. The symmetry, the absence of trace, the lack of decay. They connected it to other child disappearances in remote villages from the early 90s. Too far apart for any normal pattern unless you weren't looking at maps. Someone online pointed out that the Masat Ridge had once been rumored to be a route used by a now defunct secta group associated with child purification rites. No proof, no names, just ash and myth. The local newspaper ran a piece titled La Chaussure du Fantôme, the shoe of the ghost. It was short, cold, dismissive. The official case was not reopened. The investigation was not reactivated. The forest was not searched again. And so the only physical evidence ever found in the case of Maurice Damien was boxed, labeled, and stored in a police archive in Toulouse. One blue children's shoe. No prints, no DNA, no timeline, no body. Just a haunting object placed in a world where nothing else made sense. By 2005, the Damiens were no longer a family. They were three people bound by an absence. The house stood the same yellow paint faded, ivy tangled deeper into the stone. The fig tree still grew by the fence. The old toy cow still sat on the windowsill, sun-bleached and silent. Louis Damien rarely spoke. Every morning, he walked the same dirt path that led from his porch to the broken wooden gate at the edge of the field. He'd sit on the bench he built himself, beneath a leaning pine, and stare at the fence. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. He no longer kept track of dates. Only the seasons. Only the way the wind sounded through the trees. He refused interviews. The few neighbors who still lived nearby said he'd nod politely, then return to the silence. He's still waiting, one said. He doesn't say it, but you can feel it. Marianne had long since left the village. She moved north, near her sister's home in Alsace. The last time she was seen publicly, she was leaving a small church barefoot, her eyes red from weeping, holding a shoebox to her chest. Some say she still writes letters to Maurice. Others say she sees him in her dreams, always 4 years old, always chasing something she can't quite make out. She has never spoken to media again. Never changed her phone number, never let go of the bed where he used to sleep. Jean is now a man. He left the village at 18 and hasn't returned. He lives under another name. He works with machines, far from children, far from forests. When asked about his brother in a rare interview for a local podcast, he said, "I don't remember the sound. I just remember the silence after." That silence never left. He declined to answer anything further. The Damiens didn't bury a child. They buried a future and lived on in the hollowed out shell of what used to be after. There was never a full explanation. The church never released a report. The police never reopened the case. The property was never demolished. And Jude Parson never gave another interview. But the facts remained. 6 children walked into a room in 1987. 32 years later, 5 were found behind a sealed wall. One of them came back, and he hadn't aged a day. Science couldn't explain it. Faith wouldn't touch it. And those who witnessed it, the janitor, the monk, the doctors, eventually stopped talking altogether. Jude lives quietly now. He does not sing in public. But once a year, always on the 17th of November, his foster family finds him humming in the early morning. Always the same song, always the same key, always alone, and always followed by silence. There are those who say he was part of something bigger, that what happened in the choir room was not a miracle, but a fracture, a moment when time folded in on itself. When music broke a rule, it was never meant to break. And somewhere, buried beneath stone and silence, the door still waits. Maybe it waits for the next voice. Maybe it waits to close completely. Or maybe it never will, because some songs aren't written to end. They echo forever. In the halls we forget, in the rooms we seal, in the children we lose, and sometimes in the ones who come back.